Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome to another exciting episode here at On the Throttle with Jacqui and Josh. And this is your official, unofficial Get Dirty episode. That's right. All of our stories for today deal with all sorts of different motorcycles and dirt and playing in the dirt and flat tracking. And we've got a great show for you today. So thank you so much for joining us. As always, thanks for clicking, liking, sharing, subscribing to all of our videos, whether you are on YouTube or the Facebook or wherever you are finding us out there on the internets. Thank you so much for tuning in. So for today's episode, I've got a couple of stories talking about a new bike that just hit the interwebs super hard this week, and this is the new Ducati Desert Sled, and then a story that actually happened a couple of weeks ago, but I wanted to make sure to give it a little bit of love, and that is talking about Shayna Texter from American Flat Track Racing. Then what do you have going on today, Josh?
I've got a couple of great things. So first off is, have you done something every year for 15 years in a row when other people are trying to prevent you from doing it? Probably not. I got a great story about a guy that has. On top of that, KTM and Honda made some big dirt announcements in terms of who's riding their bikes this year for the Supercross series. Excited to talk about that. And one more quick thing, I've got to give a shout out to Nancy. I was going to start the show with the helmet after all the conversations that we had last week. But with the glasses on this week, I didn't have my contacts in with the glasses. Too much of a pain to get it on and off. But I wanted to give you a shout out anyway. So, Jacqui, let's hear about the Ducati.
Well, I certainly do appreciate you covering up that face that's built for radio, yes. Josh. So thank you for thinking about all of our viewers out there. But first things first, our very first story that has been eagerly anticipated all over the internet, and that is the release of the Ducati Desert Sled. Well, they were talking about this, or Desert X, I should call it. The Desert X, they have been teasing out for several months now. Because they've been doing this like multi-week premiere event where they're sneaking out digitally one bike a week, it seems like. And they announced at the very beginning of the program that the last one was going to be this Desert X, and that is what's on your screen right now. And this is going to be this great looking white bike. However, I'm not going to lie, Josh, I don't know the marketing director that chose to put them in white on white, because if this doesn't say Star Wars and Desert Troopers, I mean, if this doesn't say Stormtrooper to you, I don't even know what to tell you. But anywho, this great looking bike just got released this past week. And just to go through some of the specs of it, the saddle height is a whopping 34.4 inches. Woo! So it's not for you or I, Josh. It's for tall folks out there. Additional, what else is going to be? Although it says it can be lowered via an accessory saddle, of course, you can get a low seat for it. It's got a 5.5 gallon fuel tank. Interestingly, removing the passenger seat open spaces for an auxiliary 2-gallon fuel tank, which is offered in the Ducati accessory catalog. I thought that was really interesting. It's got, as you can tell, it's this huge, tall, massive bike. And then Ducati has adopted the 937 Testastrada V-twin power plant, which is seen in the Multistrada V2 and Monster models, which is rated at 110 horsepower and approximately 68 foot-pound of torque. So this bike, I think, is really interesting. I think it's really cool looking. It's really different for the folks over at Ducati. So it's a great, cool, neat thing for them. It definitely is it has been burning down the internet. It's going to land in the dealerships in June of 2022, and the starting MSRP is going to be $16,795. So what do you think about that bike, Josh? Check out that new Desert X from the folks over at Ducati.
So the first comment that I have to make is the same thing as your Stormtrooper one, except slightly different. Nothing is more Ducati than people wearing white on adventure bikes. It really is to me. I mean, it says it all. One of the things, I mean, on the technical side of it, you mentioned that available passenger seat kind of fuel tank. If you look at the technology behind that, it's actually really, really cool, because you can unload that tank into the main tank on the fly. So to me, there's stuff like that is really cool. So that way, you can manage your fuel, knowing how much you've got in that tank, stuff like that. This bike, I mean, it's really cool. And we talked before when they first kind of alluded to this bike, you're like, okay, the what was it, 2019? Was that when they had the concept bike? And you're like, how much is it going to look like this?
Yeah,
they did it. They really.
It's pretty. No, it's really on the nose for this prototype that they've been showing off for the past handful of years. Of course, with 2020, the forgotten lost year. I don't even remember the last trade show it was at. It could have been 5 years ago. Could have been 5 months ago. Who knows? Time has no meaning out here anymore. But they have been showing this prototype and concept all over the internet. They have been showing it at a handful of live events. I will admit, and I said it to you last month, I had real serious doubts about them being real true to this concept and prototype they were showing off, and I will be the first to admit I was dead wrong. They totally stuck to it. They put out a pretty true version of what they were dragging around Europe and showing people, so I do applaud them for that. Thank you, Ashley, for the next slide, so you can get a better look at it without all the stormtrooper action going on top of it. a little bit cleaner side profile. This is a great looking bike. So I do want to, give a little bit of a high five to the folks at Ducati for putting this out, being in this ADV space in a bigger way. I said earlier and I misspoke. I apologize. I said Desert Sled. This is the Desert X. The Desert Sled is a different bike that was put out by the Ducati Scrambler folks. A very, very cool bike in its own right, a little bit more retro looking. This very futuristic, very now ADV, but also, I mean, does it smell like Kajiva in here, or is it just me, Josh? Because to me, this is dead ringer for the Kajiva Elephant, which also happens to be the inspiration for the new MV Agusta adventure bike. So I'm really curious to see what the differences are going to be. I think some of the tech on this bike are very interesting. At $17,000 for an ADV bike, I think that's a pretty decent price tag. I don't think that's that terrible. What do you think, Josh?
It's in an interesting spot because it's this, how boxers, there's light, middle, heavyweight. That's where I kind of put this too, because when you look at stuff, you've got stuff all the way from like a KLX 230 all the way up to the GSs and KTM 1290s and stuff like that. This is at that heavier end, but it's the light end of the heavy. What I find interesting about it is it's an expensive bike. Who is going to be willing to chuck that at the scenery? That is what's going to be interesting to see about it when you and it's going to fit into an interesting slot in this market. So once again, we mentioned last week how there's been so many different bikes are all having their niche carved out. They aren't competing for the same thing. Like if you're looking at a 450 dirt bike, you're kind of I don't want to say you're going off of color of it, but there's not a whole lot between them. With the ADV bikes, it's really coming down to what you do and what you want, because they're putting different amounts of tech and stuff like that into them. You've got the 1290 Adventure, you've got this now, the Desert X from Ducati, and then at the far end of it, you've got something like the Tenere Yamaha. So
I just want to take a... Oh, go ahead.
It's an interesting slot.
For sure. So the only thing I did want to take a second and point out while you touched on it, and then we'll move on and get on out of here, is going to be the fact that they are saying that this bike is in the 445-pound category, though, which is 100 plus pounds lighter than the GS. It puts out approximately 110 horsepower. The GS is close to like 125, 130. So at 100 pounds lighter, I think that's super interesting, Josh, but we're all going to have to wait and see. This bike will be hitting dealerships approximately June of 2022. Now, what kind of Get Dirty story do you have for us next, Josh?
So mine's got Get Dirty origins, but it's pretty clean. So during the winter months, when us in the north here, we're waiting for those either days where it's snowy enough or warm enough or when we can go ride, those garbagey days, I end up camping out on the couch watching X Trials. These are indoor trials that if you've never seen trials before, these guys are absolutely insane with what they do. So there's the first slide here, we've got Toni Bow, and he's literally going from one step. He ends up on top of that round piece up there. The next one, Adam Raga, same thing. I mean, they're going and doing these impossible things, and they get docked points if they either A, fall off, or B, they get docked points if they put a foot down. If you look, he climbed up basically a bunch of boxes to this point from the stage floor down there. So X Trials to me it's the ultimate in motorcycle balance skills. And if you've never seen it, blow a weekend on YouTube. It's very easy to do watching the X Trials stuff.
I don't blame you.
What's so interesting about it is, Toni Bo has won the X Trials Championship 15 times now. It's always, I don't want to say been close, but talk about domination. So, I mean, to me, so the last slide that we have here is him basically on the podium saying, "Yep, I got this." I mean, 15 years in a row, he has won the World X Trials Championship. What an accomplishment. I've got to give, more than a round of applause. He's been winning longer than some of our viewers have been alive. It's such an interesting thing to watch, and just the pure skill involved. Have you dabbled with any of the trial stuff, Jacqui?
Actually, ironically, yes, I have actually, just a tiny little bit in my own nerdy way. I have borrowed a vintage trials bike to go riding, but in the desert, not to do true trials on it, but it works out for me really great because they have such squishy suspension and I'm very, very short. So that works out perfect for me. I loved riding it. Desert riding, you end up standing up anyway, so you don't really need a seat, which trials bikes do not have a seat because you are also standing on it the whole time. So it really worked out perfect. I absolutely loved it. I agree with you. I definitely want to spend my winter not only Netflix and chilling, but I also want to spend it X Trialsing and chilling. So I will definitely look for these videos out on YouTube and check them out. I do love trials. You're totally right. The skill involved is just so incredible. I do love watching these. It is truly like rider skill, up and down and sideways all around the whole thing. So congratulations to Mr. Toni Bo for his 15th win. That is absolutely outstanding and clearly dominating the trials scene.
One of the things that I love about it is when you watch, whether it be road racing or Supercross or whatever, you can see good moves, but you don't always understand how inch perfect that level of rider is. In trials, you can see it is millimeter perfect. I had to convert to metric for that. But it is millimeter perfect in how they handle their bikes. And you can see if they're off by this much in some cases, out the door they go. Unbelievable to see, unbelievable to watch. Speaking of which,
sure, Josh. And every inch counts, Josh.
Yes. Speaking of which, you've got someone else that's doing some other types of riding at a little bit different of a speed and maybe not going as much in the air.
But also at the same super, super high level of motorcycle skill set, and another racer that absolutely dominates in the world of American flat track racing, and that is Shayna Texter. Several weeks ago, Indian Motorcycle dropped the new news that Shayna Texter is going to be joining the Indian Motorcycle factory team alongside her husband and her brother-in-law. That's right, it's a family affair for 2022 over at Indian Motorcycle for AFT SuperTwins class. Now, this is why this is a super interesting story. First of all, just the fact that it's her husband, and then her husband's brother, all on the same team, I think is just super, super, interesting and small world and totally connected. I love the idea of that. But Shayna Texter is the winningest, not winningest woman, the winningest racer in American flat track singles history. She has absolutely dominated the singles class for years now. She is a super, super fearless competitor in the singles competition. And the reason why I kind of wanted to bring this up and talk about it a little bit is because in American flat track racing, the singles division is sometimes referred to as in a little bit of like a lesser than, or that it's a feeder class. And that's absolutely not true. That 450 class, the times, if you really look at them side by side versus the twins bikes, the times and lap times are really neck and neck. It just has to do, the real big difference is really the size. It's the size and the weight of the machines. So she is going to be stepping up in that way, up into the Super Twins category. I'm really excited to see what happens. The Indian motorcycles, as you know, Josh, have been absolutely unstoppable for the past several years over in American flat track pro racing. However, here's the twist. Here's the plot twist for 2022. American flat track racing is going to start instilling some new rules for this, particularly that are going to particularly affect the Indian motorcycle gang. It has to do with intake and yada, 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 a bunch of technical jazz, but they're basically trying to limit the bikes in a way in order to make the rest of the field more competitive, which flat track pro level racing has been known to do every handful of years or so. When somebody is just cleaning the clocks a little too much and a little too long, they like to go ahead and start putting some rules in place in order to try to kind of make it a little bit more fair. So tons of question marks going on. Shayna Texter on a twin bike, a heavier bike, a totally new brand, although she was the very first person, not woman, very first person to put Husqvarna on the top of the box for American flat track racing also. So anyway, Josh, that's what I got to say about that. What do you think about that?
So what's interesting is whenever you move bike classes, and it doesn't matter who it is, what it is, when it is, the power output, it takes a different riding style. So true racers can adapt their riding style to fit whatever class they're going to be racing in. So I'm excited to see how well she does with that. To your point, in terms of times and everything like that between those two classes, you can only get so much power to the ground. When it comes down to it. And these 450s now, these singles make so much power that you can only get X amount to the ground. So that's why those are so much closer. To see that she's going to be doing this and working with Indian as a factory racer, I think that's just awesome. Doesn't matter who it is. If they've earned a promotion like that, kudos to them.
Absolutely. We've got a great picture on the screen of her with that Husqvarna. Again, the first person to put Husqvarna on the top of the box in pro American flat track racing. But I've also, she turned a program, the Husqvarna program and the KTM program, put that on its head and started putting those bikes up on the box. So she's no stranger to being on a brand new bike, a brand new program, and just totally working it out because she's so ferocious on the track and is such an excellent racer. So I personally am very excited for 2022 to watch her race for Indian Motorcycle. Now, what's your final story here at our very special Get Dirty episode today, Josh?
So we've got a number of really cool things here with this. So first off, we're going to look at Honda. American Honda presented its 2022 Team Honda rider roster. That is really tough to say. So on that, I knew I was going to stumble on that. I'm like, do I say it differently? I'm like, just go with it. Didn't work. So this is Ken Roczen, Chase Sexton, Hunter Lawrence, and Jett Lawrence. So, really, Honda's done a good job of making sure that they've locked down the guys that have done well for them and worked well with them in the past. Once again, I think this is going to be a really strong lineup for them. I think they're going to do well with this. Now, on the flip side of that, and what I find so funny about this is that KTM took the exact same picture for their rider roster, which, I guess maybe same photographer. But they have, on the next slide, it's Cooper Webb, Marvin Musquin, Aaron Plessinger, and who was the other one? Max Vohland is set to race. So that is the same thing with KTM. So to me, once again, it's guys that are solid, that have worked well within those organizations for the most part. I think Supercross is going to be another interesting year. Anytime you get to see a number one plate on a bike, you're like, okay, it's how are they going to handle that pressure, things of that nature. I'm excited to see how that season pans out this year. I think both of them have made good selections, and we're going to see some competitive racing in the coming year.
Oh, I think so too, definitely. There's a lot of very, very important big names on both of those racing rosters, Josh. And no, I think it's going to be a really exciting season. And a lot of people have been making noise because Supercross did release their calendar about a month or two ago, if I remember correctly. And the dates are all over the place in really different locations, places that they haven't been for a hot minute. And, you know, last season, again, 2020, the forgotten year, they ran like 20 races in Utah because that's all that they could do. And anyway, it was all screwy, but now they're going back to traveling and being all over the United States, and they're going to some really different locations, which I am really excited about. So I think it's just going to be a great year for Supercross. It's one of my most favorite things to tune into, particularly here in the middle part of America when it's cold and gloomy out. It's awesome to watch some incredible racing going on. So I personally cannot wait for the 2022 Supercross season to begin. Josh, what do you think about that show today? All sorts of exciting news, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but all sorts of dirt bike stuff going on. And our special episode of Get Dirty.
I was about to say, we really had the dirt on everything.
Well played, sir. Well played, sir. I was waiting for that one to show up. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. This was a great episode. Make sure you go ahead, hit those notifications on and that subscribe button, no matter where you are watching at, because we've got a great episode coming up next week. So make sure you check back. You're not going to want to miss it. It is going to be our special holiday show where we are going to talk about motorcycle-themed gifts to give or perhaps to receive. I think I've got Josh's Christmas I'm going to do. So make sure you come on back. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. We'll see you next week.